All right, hello, this is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And because yesterday, Monday, September 25th, 2017, I had two people who were not in class, what I have decided to do, I did tape the lecture for Chapter 13, but I wanted to go over the exercise we did as a class for Chapter 13. Some people had problems with this. I've had problems with this before. Sometimes there seems to be a syncing problem. That's S-Y-N-C-I-N-G, S-Y-N-C-H-I-N-G, where the database can't sync up correctly. So, in the book, in Chapter 13, in the book, there was an exercise that you were to go over using the data list control. And if you go over that exercise, it's towards the end of the chapter, sorry. But that's all information on the data source or data list control. But when we look at this, and it's coming, there it is, product list application. This is what you create. So there's a drop-down list here that there's a data source that's hooked up to. There's costumes there, there's props, FX props, or special effects and other stuff. Every time you click here and change, the stuff that is here, it changes. This is from the categories table, I believe, and this is from the products table. All right, so there's two different, there is one data source for this control and one data source for this control. The reason I'm showing you this is what we're asked to do in the first exercise for Chapter 13 is to do the same thing but add another field, which is a total, which takes the unit price, multiplies it by the on hand, and puts it in there as a total. So I'm going to do this exercise, or let's say I'm going to attempt to do this exercise right now. All right, first thing I'm going to do is I have the starter files for everything, so I'm going to go over and I'm going to find out under Muroc. So there's all the starters, so I'm going to grab both of the Chapter 13 starter files, copy them to the clipboard. Let's see, I don't know, I may even have these already on the desktop, but I don't know if they're new ones or not new ones, so I'm just going to put it into a folder called Redo, and I'm going to paste that in. All right, once they're pasted in, I'm going to take the first example, and that's the only one we went over yesterday, which was the product list, I believe. So I'm going to open it up inside of Visual Studio. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to see if it runs. All right. Again, it should look virtually identical to the one that is in Chapter 13 itself. So I'm going to bring up the default file. There it is. And let's go over it. Just trying to run it right now first. And then we're going to go over what's there now, for lack of better words, line by line, pretty much. So this should look, when we bring it up, this right here is the identical one to the one that is in Chapter 13 in the book, all right, that I just mentioned to you. Okay, so let's take a look at the code that makes this work, makes it happen, whatever you want to say. So by now, we should all be familiar with this stuff. This is called our page directive right here. It says our language, it says our wire up, in the inherits. I didn't go over this in class yesterday, but I'd found a couple really nice URLs. ASP.NET auto event wire up. How to use auto event wire up with an ASP.NET form. All right, that was from support.microsoft.com, and it goes over it. And it says why you use it. But there was another one that was in there that I actually thought was maybe even a little bit better because it was more succinct. In other words, in just a few words, it kind of talked about what it was. And this was from Stack Overflow. And this is what the person here said. When you request a page, it raises various events which are considered to be part of the page lifecycle. And he says, I keep the visual representation, so this, he's literally got here in here a picture. Of course, don't show it to me now. There it is. Sorry. So this is some of the stuff that happens. These are the different life cycle methods. Now, it's hard enough to read, period, but you can see them as we blow that up. But they also show it here, kind of what's happening. So there's a lot of different things that are going on, for lack of better words. Okay? All right. So the auto event wire up property, when true, automatically wires up some of these built-in events in the page lifecycle to their handlers. This means you do not need to explicitly have the programmer attach these events. All right, they give a couple of examples here. If you set auto event wire up to true and provide explicit wiring up of the event handlers, you will find them being executed twice. So in other words, you don't have to write the code. And it says this is one reason why Visual Studio keeps this set to false by default. And then it says it's useful to note that the default for auto wire up attribute of the page, which is where we are, is true, but the property of the page is set to false. So short story long, this is true, so we don't have to write extra code. All right, so we come in here, this by now, set the title, and add, say that it's going to be mobile right here, and then add our CSS files, add our JavaScript files, nothing new there. This is kind of interesting because notice it's the Jumbotron, and it's got a comment here. We don't even need this, but it says image set in site.css. So let's look at that. So we go under content, we go under our file, site.css, and there's the Jumbotron. So it's saying it's setting the background to the banner and the background size to 100% height and width with basically 16-point margin at the top. All right, now you know I'm a little anal about this stuff, so I'm going to knock this down into several lines the way that I do it. All right, so we've got that right there that I'm working on right now. That's the label that says choose a category. All right, so what is that? I'm going to jump back because I've stopped the run. But that is this, choose a category. That's right here. That's what that is. Okay? So then, and notice it's bootstrapped too. It even has some offsets. It's designed to be set up so that it looks decent. Then we've got the drop-down list that we set with our category. We've got our run at equals server. Notice we have auto post back equal true, and that is because every time we change the type of category, we want that to be posted back to the server so we get new output. All right. The data source that we're linking it to is the first one on the page, SQL source 1. The field we're using is the long name, and the field we're grabbing to use from the database is the category ID. All right. Then we have the actual data source itself right here. There's the run at equals server. There's the ID. There's the connection string, which says it's the Halloween database we're using. And here is our select command. I think we can put this on multiple lines. I don't think it hurts at all. But the reason I'm doing that is to show you there's the select. So that's what we're selecting. There's where we're selecting it from. And there's our order by. Okay? So that's the setup for all of that. Then we've got the setup for, this is for our output right here. Okay, so we've got a data list. There's the ID. It's got our products in there. Oops, what happened here? And that's what we want. Again, the key field now is the product ID because that's what we're basing it off of, and we're hooking it up to data source 2. We're putting this into a table that's bordered, striped, and condensed. All right. And then after we do that, we're setting up all the components of the data list. So this right here, these are our headers. All right. So those headers are what are shown right here. That's the headers. Now that should make sense, ideally at least, to everyone. Then we put that into a header template. Then down below, we've got our detailed data, okay? And with our detailed data, that data is, that is this stuff. That should make sense to you. So what we want to do is we want to come in, we currently don't have this. So this thing that's in blue, pretend it's not there. That's what we have to add. So we have to add a new field to multiply this by this to give us this. All right, so how do we end up doing that? First thing we have to do is we have to make a new heading. Okay? Now, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, we only have 12 columns. So let's knock this down to 2, 4, 6. Now we're okay. 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And this will change to total. Now I'm not sure if we're going to get an error when we do this, but I'm going to try it and see if what this does is if it gives me the new column with no data yet. And if it does, that's good. That's what I want to have happen. There's our total. Notice it pushed over this stuff, but we have our new column. That's good news. This will get fixed in just a minute. This is skewed because it's 3, 3, 3, 3 still, but we'll fix that in just a minute. All right, so how are we going to fix that? Well, we just came in and we added a new header here. So we have to also add a new item down here. All right, so let's pretty this up just a little bit because I think it's much easier to see when we do this. You may or may not agree, but I'm going to take each one of these and put them in their own area. They're not really on their own lines, not on their own line, but on their own lines. So there's the second one. There's the third one. And finally, here is our fourth one. All right, whoops, I do want that. All right. But the thing is, now we need to add another one of these. And the new one that we add, first of all, we got to knock these back down. In other words, this is going to be 2. This is going to be 2. This is going to be 2. All right. And we want to, for lack of better words, copy this one right here. Okay. And we want to put it in here. So we're going to have a new one here, and this will be LBL total. All right, run at server. This will be total. Okay, and this is also going to be 3. So we now have 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's all okay. Everything in there is good. But there's one thing we still have to do. We have to come in here and we have to change our query because our query right now is not figuring out, that total field. So let's come down to our select command here. We've got product ID, we've got name, we've got unit price, we've got on hand. All right, but we want to add one more field there in just a moment. Now, there's different ways that we can do this. In the textbook, they show you how to do it using all the wizards. I find it easier to come in and write your code directly. So that's what I'm going to do, and we'll see when I get done if it works or not. All right, so I'm going to come in here, and there's the product, there's the name, there's the unit price, there's the on hand, but I want a new field. All right, so this new field is going to be the unit price. I'll fix it in just a minute here. The unit price times the on hand, and we're going to save that as total. So we're getting the product ID, the product name, the unit price, the on hand, but then we're creating a new field called total that's going to be unit price times total. That's our new field. That's our heading for our new field. And that's our data for our new field. All right, so let me save this and let me come back and run it again. And lo and behold, Everything's lined up now. $39.99 times 100 gives you $39.90, etc. If I go and change from costumes to masks, it changes accordingly. Costumes to props, it changes again. Special effects, it changes again. So hopefully you can take a look at that and it makes some sense. So one last time, as we go over the exercise here, what did I change? Well, the first thing I did, because it's just the way I do things, good, bad, or indifferent, is I prettied up what we have here, because it's easier for me to look at. So I made this multiple lines. All right, I explained what all this is, but by now, everything that's in here should make sense to all of you. Everything that's in here should make sense to all of you. You should be getting a grip on the bootstrap stuff. So ideally, everything that's in here makes sense to you, which brings us down to about line 25. You'll notice here we're adding an HTML label. It's an HTML label. Double check and make sure I'm taping. And I am. All right. It's an HTML label because it's static text. We're not changing it. All right. Then we've got that label is for this drop-down list. That drop-down list has got an ID of DDL category and run at equals server. Remember, for any ASP.NET component, we have to put in at a minimum these two things. Then we want to set auto post back to true, because what that does is every time we change something, we change a different item that is in the, how do I say this? Every time we change a different item that is in the drop-down list, all right, that the category, we want that sent back to the server, so the server will go and look in the database and give us the information that's associated with that particular category. All right? To bind it, to link it up to the database, we're telling the data source ID, and we're setting it equal to SQL source 1. Now, if you notice, if you look in here, there's SQL source 1, there's SQL source, or SQL data source 1, and SQL data source 2. All right, so that's where we're linking them up. All right, now, after we do that, we have to put in a connection. Oops, I'm sorry. So after we do that, we have to say, okay, the data text field, and let's take a look at this. Let's go back here, because in our book, I'm going to jump back here for, quite a, well, not there. Sorry. All right, I'm going to jump back quite a few pages here, so let me jump back to about page 465. It's not even far enough. Again, it is imperative that you read, starting on page 462, how to use the data list control, because it explains it. All right? Here it tells what the date ID, the run at, the data source ID are. Again, the ID of the data source that you bind the list to. That's what it's referred to as binding. Then they go through, in the book, this is what they do. They go through when they want to set this stuff up, and I did not do this in class, but what you should be able to do is, for instance, if I'm here, I'm in the drop-down list. If I go to source mode, if I go to design mode, and I go to the drop-down list, and I click here, I can choose my data source, and I can configure it from right there. I find it easier to just use code. If you don't want to do that, there's sort of an intermediate route you can take. You can come in here and set a bunch of the stuff right here in your properties window. So it's whatever you're the most comfortable with. But again, I can't say this too many times. It is imperative that you read starting on page 462 and going 463, 464, 465, 466 when they talk about formatting it. And what I did by hand, they show you how another way you can do it. And then they get into, so that's 462 to 467. Also read the end of the chapter starting on 468, how to use data binding. I have lectured on this, but it's imperative that you read it anyway as it goes through. And there's your explanation of the data source ID, the data source you're binding to, the text field, which is the data source displayed, and the value, all right, which is the one returned. This value is typically the database property, all right? It's a lot of times it's a primary key. This is the field you want to show. Now, I don't know about you, but if we change this, so instead of showing the actual description there, we show the category ID. Instead of costumes, that would say something like Cat 01. That's very hard to remember, especially if you've got scores of different categories, all right? It gets very hard to remember. All right. So, again, please read the end of this chapter. All right? It's not that much to read. This tells you how to bind the controls. This talks to you about what happens in the eval, and then they go through the product list application. All right? So, that is the first exercise. And again, so we talked about this. Then we come down, and this sets up our data source. We're binding it there, and that's the associated select command. All right? Then we come in here, and now this is setting up our data list. All right, it's data list products. The key field, the one that we're basing it off of, is the ID. The data source is our second SQL data source, and we're setting up a bunch of CSS table classes for it. This is our header. So again, once we run this, this is what's going to show, as I mentioned to you already, that's this right here, ID product, unit price on hand, and total. Well, we added the total. Previously, this said 3, 3, 3, and 3, and this one didn't exist. 3, 3, 3, 3 equal 12. Well, this whole thing still has to equal 12, because if it doesn't, it's going to put the total header and the total itself on the next line, which will look very unprofessional. So I cut this down to 222, which is 633, which is 912. All right. But then once I made this 22233, I had to make this 22233. All right. So it again equaled 12. So this set up our header template. This is setting up our item template right here. And this says do the evaluation. In other words, bring that in. Remember, these are both select statements. We can't change the data. We're just looking at it. So the eval here, all it's doing basically is it's saying go out to the database and bring in that field. All right. So we've got the product ID, which is going to take up 2 columns. Then the name, which is 2 columns for extra small and above. Then the unit price, which is 2 columns. Then the on hand, which is 3 columns. And the total, which is 3 columns. The fact that I made 22233 was arbitrary. I could have set it up any way I wanted to as long as it was 12. All right, then we set up a header style. This is explained in the chapter. Then finally we have the associated information here. All right, the associated information here for our data source control. And then finally, this shows you the control parameter. All right. This is just select parameters because we're not changing any data in here. Now what I'm going to do, this is 127 lines, which should be about 2 pages. I'm going to print out 9 copies of this, one for me, and I'm going to give, since this one is all laid out the way I like it to be laid out, I'm going to give a copy of this to everyone in class today. All right, so let me do that. Control P, go to my preferences here. Landscape, put it on both sides, okay. We're going to say 9 copies, send it out to the current printer, print. All right, so that's the first one. Now, what I plan on doing in class today is also the second one. After I do the second one, what I'd like to do after going through the second one is to go through as much of Chapter 14 as we can go through. Now, let me just say before I finish this lecture up, this stuff is not easy. It's not that it's hard, but it's a different way of looking at things. All right, I think it's almost time, and maybe we'll do this next week, for us to take a step back and look at database design. All right, so that's pretty much it. I've probably going a good 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So this will be saved as exercise 13.1. All right. Now I've already got 13.1 in here someplace. And I've done everything for it. Okay, but I don't think I'm going to end up putting that one out online because this one I thought came out much better. So I've got this thing here that's called Extra 13 V1. And I'm just going to change the name of that. So I'm going to save what I'm working on, but I'll save it without the V1. Okay, be back shortly.